This week on the Walk On podcast. Let me go back to the beginning. You talked about playing school as a kid, and you go from there to trying teaching and saying it wasn't for you, and then finding it later in life. At what point did that young girl Audrey connect with professional Audrey that this is what I want to do?
I think there was a moment when I was living in Central America in Nicaragua when I was asked to teach some English to the people I was working with, where I just sort of looked up and was like, okay, universe, I get it. And then definitely in graduate school, I really did feel like I found my people. Identifying as a linguist and an applied linguist, like we are a community of word nerds with like a very, unique identity.
Hello and welcome to the Walk On podcast. We continue season 5 today. I am both excited and nervous about having our guest on, and you'll hear a little bit about why in a minute. But if you're a regular listener, welcome back, or watcher, welcome back. And if you're new here, the Walk On podcast is the outgrowth of my pursuit of finding purpose and passion on really the back half of my career. Hopefully the back quarter maybe, I don't know. But really trying to understand how I could find something that was really driving me forward with purpose and passion. And with my experience in media and public relations and the craze of everybody and their brother having a podcast, I decided to join the fray and have one as well. So that's what you're listening to. It's the Walk On Podcast Season 5. Our guest today, why am I excited? Why am I nervous? I have the great pleasure of bringing on someone today who I know very well. She happens to be my wife. So this is a first, I think, for Audrey's first podcast and first time having a family member besides my brother on the podcast. And so let me give a little bit of introduction before we turn it over to you and welcome you, Audrey. Dr. Audrey Roberson is an associate professor of educational studies at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, my alma mater. She has a PhD in applied linguistics from Georgia State, also my alma mater. I'm sensing a trend here, and really is an expert in, she's focused her work now on helping to create the next generations of teachers, in particular, those who are going to work with English language learners in the K through 12 environment. And so with that, I bring on Dr. Audrey Roberson. Hello, Audrey.
Hello, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. No, seriously, it really is a pleasure. And I was so thrilled to be invited. I've obviously been behind the scenes for the making of this podcast. And I really, just on a personal note, think it's so amazing that you needed this thing in your life and it didn't exist. And so you created it. So for your listeners, this is just like a tremendous thing that you've done. And I couldn't resist that little partner note there. And as a guest, I am thrilled to be here and have listened to all of your podcasts and found something really useful. I've gotten a lot out of them. So I'm happy to be here. And I hope that your listeners can get something out of this conversation. So thank you.
Well, that's very kind, and I'm sure they will. And I'm in the back of my mind hearing that old radio line, longtime listener, first-time caller. So welcome, caller.
Exactly.
So Audrey, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your bio and background?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I was thinking about coming on today, I remembered that I think I've been a teacher in my soul. Like even as a little kid, I remember playing school in the basement of the house that I grew up in. We had like this old antique student desk somehow that the previous owners had left, one of those desks that has like the top connected to the seat. And I would torture my little sister and make her be my student. We would sit down there for hours and like play school. I was a nerdy little kid and I loved reading. I loved books and words and collecting new words and learning them. So I've just always been kind of immersed in like the life of the mind and learning and teaching. And then I did my undergraduate work at Emory University in Atlanta, where I grew up. I double majored in Spanish and in international studies with a focus on Latin America. And I was able to intern at the Carter Center in Atlanta, and I worked on the Cuba desk, which was super exciting. I studied abroad throughout Latin America, so I got to really hone my Spanish skills. I worked for the America Reads program there. So I tutored elementary kids in the Atlanta public school system. So I got to develop my Spanish and work in schools to really continue like my love of working with kids and teaching and my love of language. I graduated from college and joined a teaching program that trained me to teach, although I didn't have any teaching background. And so I started my career after college as a high school Spanish teacher in South Texas on the Mexican border, which was a very challenging job. It was definitely trial by fire. And I learned a lot, but I also left that job thinking that I was awful at teaching and that I never wanted to go back and I never wanted to do it again. It was really, really hard. I had a tough time and I thought that teaching wasn't for me and I thought that I was no good at it. So I did a lot of different things throughout my 20s. I did some public health work. I moved around a lot. I sold wedding gowns. I worked in restaurants. I moved to Latin America and sold beach real estate briefly, which I was pretty bad at the real estate part. So
But good at the beach part, just bad at the real estate part.
I mean, he's good at the beach part, yeah. So I also worked for, like, a property management company, and I would get beach rentals ready for the clients who were coming, and so I would work with the household staff there, and they were all locals, they were Spanish speakers, and I got to know them, and they asked me if I would teach them some English because they thought that that would really help them. There was a lot of tourism in the town, and they thought that they could get better jobs if they could learn some English, and I said, I don't think so. I'm not a teacher. I'm not trained in how to teach English, and I tried that, and I don't think that anyone learned anything. I'm actually, like, a really bad teacher, and I don't think I can teach you anything, actually. And they said, "Well, you know how to teach English, so you can probably teach us something." So I said, "Okay, you can come over, to the apartment tonight and so they did, and then the next night there were a few more, and the next night there were a few more, and the next night there were a few more, and I ended up having this little ESL class on the porch, and I figured out that I did not know how to teach English. I was right. I could not explain a lot of the things about how English works, which is true. It's a complicated language and tough to explain. I came back to the States and went back to Georgia State, your alma mater, and mine, and thought that I wanted to just add a credential to my teaching certificate so that I could become trained in how to teach English to language learners. And what was supposed to be just a semester of a couple of extra classes became a master's and a PhD, and 7 years later, a couple of degrees in applied linguistics because I found a discipline that I really loved. I'd never taken a linguistics class before. They weren't offered. When I went to Emory, there were no linguistics classes. There are now. But I felt like I really found my people. Like for the first time, I was surrounded by word nerds, and there were other people who were just like geeking out about grammar and would not leave the classroom until we figured out this syntax tree and just loved words and grammar and language as much as I did. And when I finished that program, I applied for professor jobs and was hired at Hobart and William Smith in their education department, where, as you said, I now work in teacher training, but I also teach linguistics classes just for any student on campus who's interested in language and language learning and how language works. I earned tenure about 5 years ago, and now I am chair of our department and doing some other leadership roles on campus. So yeah, that's a long intro with some stories along the way. So
No, it's great, and I actually learned a couple things, so that's really good, actually. So, yeah, so but I really we were gonna sort of have some questions, but you brought something up that it really resonated with me, and I really wanna dive in if we can.
sure.
So, you talked about sort of just being thrown into the classroom, in Texas right out of college with a lot of training, a lot of experience. How common is that for teachers to have that sort of sink or swim experience?
In terms of the numbers, I'm not sure. There are several programs like the one that I mentioned. I did a program called Teach for America. So that program recruits heavily on elite college campuses like the one that I went to. Also, some of the more prestigious charter schools like KIPP, the Knowledge is Power program, and others recruit heavily at undergraduate college campuses. And they are models which are founded to address a real problem, which is that we have a teacher staffing crisis. And many of them are also founded from an equity perspective. So they place teachers in classrooms which are underserved, underfunded, and they want to address achievement gaps. So, I agree philosophically with a lot of the reasoning there. I know now from where I sit that teaching is a skill that requires training that I didn't have. And mine was not a personal failing, it was a failing of preparation. And so this is a conversation that I have with students on campus who know that I did the program and they come and talk to me about it. And I'm really candid with them.
Yeah.
So I think that students who want to go into the classroom, anyone who wants to go into the classroom needs appropriate training.
Yeah, as you know, my father was a teacher almost his entire career, taught special education most of his career. And I think that was one of the things as a child in that household, just sort of the disrespect that there is towards teaching. Oh, it's just people want their summers off. And, it's not a profession. There's the old line like those who can do and those who can't teach, right? Which is obviously so offensive. But there's this sort of ethos that, or not an ethos, but just we can throw anybody in a classroom and they'll be fine. And, but we want our children to learn. We want our children to gain skills and critical thinking skills. And you can't just throw someone in a classroom. You have to know how to teach. So how do you bring that to life with the students that you're working with?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you're right. We really do, as a society, need to rethink like the way that we value teachers. And we need to understand that really entrusting our kids with teachers who really, when they're in school, they're spending more time with teachers than they are with us. Like, what is the function of schools? What is the value of schools? What do we believe? What do we want schools to do? Do we believe, as John Dewey said, that schools are the engines of democracy? Like, are schools
Yeah.
really preparing civically engaged people who are going to keep the world running? Then, like, that's a tremendous responsibility.
Yep.
And there are
Yep.
countries who see it that way and who train and compensate teachers that way. But you asked about the classroom. I really try to connect with my students. I often start with, what was your education like? That's often the first place I start because, that's our first entry point to thinking about teaching and becoming teachers. And that evokes like a real range. Like, I'm a person for whom public education works really well. I was a really good student. Grade-wise, I got really good grades. I've won all the awards at the assemblies. Teachers liked me. My mom volunteered. Everybody in the building knew who I was. And some of my students identify with that. And then I challenge them, okay, well, why is that true for you? And then we get to, well, because schools were built for people like me, you know? I'm able-bodied, I'm neurotypical, I'm white, I speak English, and then, I encourage my students who have different stories to tell their stories, students for whom school didn't work as well, and I know that you identify as one of those
I
people, right?
do.
You were, like, a little bit too curious for school the way it works.
And
Um,
a little too talkative, but that's a whole other conversation. That's why I have a podcast now.
yeah, but I think those 2 things go together, like,
Yeah.
I wanted to get the right answers and get the pat on the head and get the gold star and, like, do everything perfectly and well, and that's a lot of the way our schools function. Like, I don't think we encourage students to think creatively and be curious as much as we should.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that I think is a great starting point for college students is, like, what was school like for you? And to start to dig beneath the surface and think about why, and just even that question that we just talked about, like, what are schools supposed to do?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is the point of them? Yeah.
Yeah, and Ted Lasso's going through my head with the Walt Whitman quote about "Be curious," and
Yes.
actually, just as an aside for me, right? One of the reasons I wasn't good in school is because I was curious about a lot of things, but not academically. And I had a teacher, my sophomore year biology teacher, who said, "You have to ask why." you have to ask why. And as you know, I then proceeded to just continuously raise my hand and say why. So, that went over really well. But, that is that curiosity. And you're right. I did a little bit of study in this area in college, and our system is still run, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here so I don't get too far over my skis, but our system is still run in sort of the industrial age model of, learn rote memorization, speak when spoken to, sit in rows. And I know there's a lot of work to get around that, but we don't encourage that creative thinking, the collaboration. It's about getting the test right, as you said, and being able to prove that, you're worthy to go on to the next level of education.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's largely true. I think that's, a legacy of standardized testing,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. And I think that when I work with college students, that's kind of some unlearning that has to happen. When I first, work with first year students in a liberal arts college, a lot of what we want them to do is ask questions. And sometimes I have a really hard time, particularly with students who are really high achievers, like I was, who wanted to just get the right answer and do
Yep.
really well and be told that we were smart. And sometimes students can have a really hard time with courses where I say, no one actually knows what the answer to this question is, because students who come through our public schools oftentimes are not taught to think that way. I think you're right. And it's no failing of teachers and it's no failing of administrators. I think it is a whole system. And a lot of it is a legacy of standardized testing, which is tied to school funding, federal legislation. That's like a whole
Yeah.
ball of, yeah, that's like a
We could
whole
have a
thing.
whole series there. And I think
Yes.
there probably are many podcasts that are about education and the
Yeah.
challenges and the bureaucracy. And so let's pivot a little bit. So I appreciate that. So, picking up on that thread a little bit, in your experience, what are the greatest challenges facing, the educators that you're getting ready to go out into the classroom?
Yeah. I think especially like from where I sit this summer, my department is doing a lot of work to kind of rethink the structure of our programs and how we're training teachers and what we're offering. And at least from the little like narrow, the education system is huge, but from my perspective, I think that liberal arts colleges and the public education system have kind of a complementary challenge where liberal arts colleges, we really need to kind of rethink our offerings and our enrollment, and we need to think about alternative revenue. We need to think about what is the value of a 4-year liberal arts college and who are our students going to be going forward. I don't think this is a secret and we're not alone. This is happening to our peer institutions too. We've experienced declining enrollment. And at the same time, there's an extreme teacher shortage in public schools. And so, I see a real opportunity there. Can institutions of higher ed, particularly liberal arts colleges, can we rethink the kinds of people that we're training as teachers? Can we think beyond this traditional 18 to 22-year-old 4-year residential student? Can we attract students coming from community colleges? Can we connect with maybe teachers' aides or teachers who, were staffed in a classroom due to a crisis, but maybe aren't credentialed yet? Can we attract career changers with our programs or people who have families and need to take classes at night or online? And can we benefit schools by, helping the staffing crisis on that end? And then to me, that's really exciting too, because it means that we are diversifying the kind of students that we're serving as teacher candidates. Because another challenge we know that public schools face is that the majority of our teaching staff are white, female identifying people. And that's not what our K-12 student body looks like.
Yeah.
And so, is there a teacher's aide in Geneva who is maybe in Geneva, New York, where I work, who is maybe a Spanish, English, bilingual woman, or man who looks a little different than our current student profile? And can we get a diversity of perspectives and experiences that way, which is exciting and benefits everybody. So,
Yeah, you and I have talked about this a bit. I think it's a really exciting opportunity. I mean, I think particularly in the world of costs going up to attend four-year colleges, people shying away, looking for value, right? So now is a real opportunity for institutions like Hobart and William Smith to think about what value tangibly are we providing. And I know Hobart and William Smith does really well on the studies that show like students that graduate and get a job, right? There is that connectivity, but really thinking about value and that connectivity of authenticity. I want to serve. I want to, make a difference in my community, which is obviously very high in this next generation.
mhm.
Giving them the tools and non-traditional teachers, as you said. So I that's my long-winded way of saying I think it's really exciting and agree, and that's we'll see where that goes. What are the challenges to getting there?
I mean, the challenges are, that small liberal arts colleges are small. So there's like a people power challenge, I guess, for sure. Anything with like licensure, we're dealing with regulations and working with the state at that level. And then, one thing that I found just like in this small slice of department leadership that I've started to work on is just like leading people through change. I found to kind of be challenging and just it can be scary to shift a mindset, you know. And I do understand that some of my colleagues have been there for decades and built things with their own hands, and it can be scary to think about shifting away from something that you helped to create. Um,
Sounds like an
it's
opportunity for executive leadership coaching.
nice plug, Mr. Mills.
Thank you very much.
You're
So,
welcome.
you brought up the role of government, and I'd love to spend a minute or two there if we can. I know state level in particular. We don't have to get into the federal level because we're currently talking about dismantling the Department of Education. So who knows what that brings? But states, in particular New York, are really investing in trying to create a pipeline of qualified teachers. So from your perspective, and I know you've spent some time on this, what's working, what's not, what can we do differently? It's a complex challenge with many moving parts and pieces, including budgets, but what's working, what's not?
Yeah, I mean, I have colleagues in my department who are much more plugged in at this level. We have great people who really are day to day connecting with people at the state education department. So that's one thing I would say is just from a relationship level, we have great context at the education department who are people we can email and call on and will help explain things to us. And they have a great cohort model where they pull together peer institutions, for calls and to help kind of decipher all of the changes that are coming out. So I think that works really well. One thing I would say is that we do oftentimes feel kind of left out of the programming that comes out in terms of like trying to fill staffing shortages or easing regulations. Oftentimes, those programs will be aimed at like the big five, which you can probably rattle off better than I can, but like Buffalo, Albany, all of the boroughs,
Yeah.
Rochester. There's five like big bucket New
Yeah.
York areas of which we're not. So I would say like maybe trying to work more with places that are smaller, but still could benefit from some of those partnerships.
Yeah. That's insightful. So let me go back to the beginning then before we'll sort of pivot towards like passion. So,
Yeah.
you talked about playing school as a kid, and I know you love sticky notes and markers, and that hasn't changed, but you go from there to trying teaching and saying it wasn't for you, and then finding it later in life almost through trial and error.
Mhm.
At what point did that young girl Audrey connect with professional Audrey, that this is what I want to do, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm passionate about? What was that? When did that happen, and what was that connection like?
Hmm. Oh, that's an interesting question. I guess I hadn't really thought about tracing that like through line. I think there was a moment though in when I was living in Central America in Nicaragua when I was asked to teach some English to the people I was working with, where I just sort of looked up and was like, okay, universe, I get it. Like, you found me. I'm a teacher. Like, okay, here I am. And I was sitting on the porch, like doing my little English classes, even though I had tried to run away from it. And then definitely in graduate school, I really did feel like I found my people.
Mhm.
And I have wonderful, like lifelong friends from graduate school, but also just like identifying as a linguist and an applied linguist. Like we are a community of word nerds with like a very, unique identity. And there were a lot of like memes and Instagram pages and just like we're a strange breed. Like we're always collecting data on language. You can't like turn that part of your brain off. So yeah, I think probably those two things, just like a teaching moment landing in my lap and then
Yeah.
finding a discipline like in graduate school.
I mean, it's serendipity. I mean, you can look at a lot of different ways of what, what that is or what people call that. I don't want to give short shrift either, though. You are helping to create the next generation of teachers, but you're also an applied linguistics. So we want to talk for a minute about that area of study and what you focus on there.
Sure. Yeah. So my research in applied linguistics has focused on two main areas. One of them is language learning. So I'm interested in how people who are acquiring English as an additional language, in particular, learn from each other as opposed to learning from a teacher. So what is the value of learning from a peer? Like, what can you gain from talking with someone who is also learning that you cannot gain from someone who is more proficient than you are? That's one thing. And then the other thing is analyzing media language, in particular, media language around mental health coverage, coverage of those issues, and what might be the potential impact of the way that the media talks about mental health issues. So, two kind of different areas.
Yeah, and really, I mean, they really go deep on both of those. What to you is sort of the through line connectivity between those two areas of study? Is it just those are the things that interest and inspire you, or is there a connectivity skill set, others that you find valuable in those sort of what you said, two different buckets?
Yeah, they really are two different buckets. I think it's probably the analytical skill is the through line, just that I'm able to break language into its component parts, like understand how it works and what the building blocks are, and kind of use that to tackle real world questions and problems.
Mhm. So, a couple last questions here as we get to the bottom of the inning, so to speak. What do you think the future holds for the teachers you're putting in the field? Are we gonna figure it out? Are you optimistic? Are you concerned? Where are you with where we go from public education in America?
I really am optimistic. I don't think that I would still be like doing my job if I weren't. Um, and on the days that I'm not, I always go back to we have like a scholarship day every May, and our seniors and our graduate students present the work that they've been doing for the whole semester, and they choose research projects which are really embedded in their teaching. So they come up with like a question that is something they're curious about related to the work that they've been doing in classrooms, and they present it to the campus. And my colleagues and I are always just like inspired to the point of tears to see like the questions that our future teachers are grappling with and the thought and care that they put into trying to solve them, and just the energy and the passion and the commitment to equity that they have. Like everything from, having their students create Instagram profiles for the captains of industry, like create an Instagram profile for John D. Rockefeller, and, getting these middle schoolers jazzed about history, to like doing mindfulness meditation with second graders and tracking data about how it made them more kind to their peers, and just really like engaged, enthusiastic, equity-minded future teachers
Yeah,
who their heart is in it and they have the training and they care, and that's who we're turning it over to. So that's what I try and
that's
remind myself of.
that's heartening. I mean, that's definitely heartening.
Yeah.
So, how do you define now that you've found your passion and your tribe? How do you define living and or leading with passion and purpose?
Living and leading with passion and purpose. I would say that I always try to pay attention to and come back to like what lights me up and what kind of, you know, puts that fire in your belly. And like for me, that's teaching, and that's the moments being in the classroom with my students and talking to them and seeing their faces light up and taking on the challenge of helping them understand the concepts that I'm trying to teach. And that's what I would tell somebody like starting out and trying to figure out what they want to do is like pay attention to those moments. Like, what are the fire in your belly moments? Like, what fuels you? What just like is meditative in the sense that you're not thinking about anything else. You're just kind of in the zone, and like know that not every moment will be like that, but that's what you can bank. You can put those moments away and they will fuel you through like the mundanity. They will fuel you through the meetings and the reports and all the other stuff that you're going to have to do. But like find the things that put the fire in your belly, I would say.
Well, that's excellent and a great place to end. I thank you for being on. We could literally talk about education for hours more, and
Yeah.
it's a really important topic. And so you're the first person I've had on to talk about this. And when I was thinking of guests, you instantly jumped to mind. This is something we definitely need to turn our attention to from a policy perspective, from, when we have children and we think about inspiring them to lead careers, putting teaching in front of them and talk about the value it has for shaping the next generation of leaders and all the fields that they can take. So thank you for the work you do. Thanks for being on today.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah, good. Well, good. It definitely was for me as well. So, this is the Walk On podcast, people living with passion and purpose, providing a roadmap for your personal journey. Hear their stories, find your passion, walk on. Again, Audrey, thanks for being on.
Thank you.
Next up on the Walk On podcast. Yes, I understand you're focused on money and a title and vacation time, and all those things are important. It is showing up and being invested that creates the opportunity. It is that flywheel that gets things going for you.
I've taught my kids, I don't care what any of you do for a living. I just want you to be happy going to work every day. And I have friends that make a lot more money than me, but they're not happy. But what I discovered with the beer job was I just wanted to get a job that made me happy and make enough money to be happy every day. And what that turned out being is that I was so passionate, in love with what I was doing every day, the money came. What kind of employee would you like, Michael? Would you like somebody that comes to work every day and loves their job every day? Yes. And you're going to keep that person no matter what, and you're going to make sure they stay.
I must have looked like a neon sign saying, look at me, won't you look at, I don't know what I'm